Good evening. This is one of our final shows for the year. It's a kind of a Christmas edition that we're doing tonight. And obviously, as
you dressed.
I certainly did, I dressed up for the occasion. As you folks who watch the show recognize, I'm normally dressed a little bit more professionally than I am today. I'm dressed this way for two reasons. Number one, even if my team loses, I'm still proud of my team, unlike people who are certain front runners. We have a gentleman in the control booth right now. Frank, could you come out here for a second, please, sir?
I'm not a front runner. A front runner is someone who is, you know.
I understand. Can you come out here for? Can you come out here for a second? We want you on camera. Now, folks, I wore this in honor of my team, basically to goad this gentleman who, until a few minutes ago, I actually thought he was from Massachusetts. This is Frank Rocco. You've seen Frank many, many times on the credits. Now you see him. This is what we have to deal with on the show.
Well, Frank knows the way to San Jose.
Yes, he does, being from San Jose. But I still think mine looks a heck of a lot better than yours does.
No.
It's common. Get out. One of the greatest assisting guys you'll ever find in your life, and I mean that sincerely, that's Frank Rocco. All joviality aside, we have just a remarkable guest tonight. And I'm not going to take the thunder away from Sandy. Sandy will explain who our guest is and why. But collectively, we go back a bit with this individual who's got just an amazing personal story. And that's the focus of this segment of our show. I want to greet Sandy. Thank you for showing up again. Where's the Chinese food? No Chinese food.
No, I left that behind.
Yeah. This is an individual. You talk about classy. When he goes out for Chinese food, he goes to China, which is what he did. And I trust that your business venture went out well.
So far, so good.
Trip wasn't too exhausting for you? A little
About,
bit.
About the usual. Yeah.
Little bit,
But,
little bit.
We'll be going back again next month, probably.
Oh, boy. Hey, why not?
So.
Gives you something to do. Glad to have you back. And without further ado.
So, I think this is a first for us. Mm-hmm. A full-up college professor will be visiting with us tonight. And but quite unique. I've met this gentleman before on a number of occasions, and how he got to be a professor at Holy Cross is quite different from what most people might expect. And what he's done is also unique. We were just talking about a book that he wrote that he will probably mention this evening, and but I noticed there were a couple of co-authors. The co-authors were two of his students. So two of his students actually got to publish a book before they graduated. Quite unique, I think. Mm-hmm. So rather than take up any more time, I think I would like to introduce Nick Sanchez, and we can start and hear how he became a professor at the College of Holy Cross here in Worcester. And I think he's been there for more than 30 years now. So,
Nick.
Well, thank you to both of you for
Thrilled
the invitation. And of course, you're asking for a long story because I came to the United States as a refugee as part of the Pedro Pan program, which brought in over 14,000 children without their parents
so that's Peter
to the
Pan.
United States. It is Peter Pan, but it's called Pedro Pan. The official name is Pedro Pan. So I came in December of 1960. Castro had been in power for about 2 years, and I ended up in refugee camps. So I was in refugee camps for about 3 months. Then I came with a younger cousin, and so what happened was when his mother came, then we moved with her. And, you know, my parents ended up coming about a year later. So, you know, my father had a friend in California, and he said, well, you know, there are jobs here. So, of course, at the time, you know, you moved to wherever there were jobs.
So what was the process of actually getting out of Cuba in that time frame? I have some recollection of the whole revolution in
Right.
Castro at that
When the
time.
Pedro Pan program began, there were a few children that by luck had visas to come to the United States. So in my case, the problem of coming in was not so much of a problem. You know, for most of the kids, it was a very serious problem, and the visas had to be specially arranged and so on. But anyway, we came, my parents came, we moved to California, my brother and my sister also came. In California, it was my mother, my father, and myself. And first we lived in the San Joaquin Valley. In Delano, California, which is, you know, out there, very interesting weather, I will say. And we lived there for 1 year, then we moved to Pomona, California. Mm-hmm. In Pomona, I attended Cal Poly, Pomona, California State Polytechnic University. You know, and as usual, what happens in America is you find people who help you. And so, for example, when I was at Cal Poly, there was a man from Korea who was a professor, and he said, Nick, you know, you should really go on with your studies. And so he went ahead and he introduced me to the faculty at the University of Southern California. So I went to to the University of Southern California. I finished my PhD after the undergraduate program. So I was there for about 5 years. I got married and then moved to Texas, and I taught first at Texas A&M University. And incidentally, right there, I became a very good friend of Phil Gramm, the senator from Texas, who was teaching
presidential
there.
candidate.
You know,
at
he
one
was my colleague, and I got to know him, and to this day we are still friends. And I married a very young woman, and she was still in college. So actually, she finished her degree, her undergraduate at Texas A&M University. And then when she went on to get a graduate degree in accounting, and to be quite honest with you, living in rural Texas, because Texas A&M University is out there, in rural Texas, was a little bit difficult. So I looked for another job, and, it turned out that we came to the Northeast. Her parents lived in the Northeast, and, that was something that drew us to, this particular part of the country. So I could tell you a lot of stories about Florida, California, Texas.
Well, I remember one snippet about when you were in Florida and looking for housing that has, I think, an interesting connection to Worcester.
Well, what
in
happened,
a way.
if you want me to tell that story, what happened was when my aunt came, we started looking for housing, my aunt, my cousin, and myself. And she wanted to go to a nice neighborhood because she was concerned with the education of the children. I think most immigrants are very concerned with the education of children. And, we walked, this was in Coral Gables, Florida. And we walked and walked. And, everybody would say, no, we cannot rent to you because we would accept no children, no pets. No children, no pets. And, this went on for almost 3 weeks. Now, it turns out that then one day we go to this building and there is this man kind of, cleaning up outside and so on. And we said, well, are there apartments available? And he said, yes. He spoke very few words. He said, yes. And, my aunt was so happy. She said, well, but we're refugees from Cuba. And to be quite honest with you, we're going to have, additional family members come to the apartment because it's the only place where people, can stay. So he said, no problem. And, my aunt was shocked by saying, what do you mean, no problem? She actually said, "Why do you want to rent to us?" And the man said something very interesting. He said, "Lady, you know, my parents and myself, we came from Albania. And we understand the situation you're going through. So I realize that many other people in the neighborhood do not want to rent apartments, you know, to Cubans. But in my building, all the Cubans and all the refugees will be welcome." And of course, you know, this, I mean, my aunt started crying. And I mean, immediately, of course, in the Cuban community, people found out about that. And the man really helped. And he never protested because he realized that the situation of refugees is a very difficult situation. And, you know, a lot of family members would, you know, come just for, you know, maybe 5 days or something. But I mean, it is very important when a refugee has, you know, someone that they can go to, you know, for a period of time and start adjusting, looking for a job, you know, looking for schools and so on and so forth. So as I always tell people, you know, in my heart, I'm very grateful to the people of Albanian, you know, descent, because this Albanian man understood the situation that we were going through. And I think it is, you know, people say, well, there should be laws to prevent discrimination, because I honestly think that there was discrimination. No, what there have to be laws are laws that allow people to rent to whomever they want, you know, and of course to be able to rent, you know, wherever they want. And ultimately there is an adjustment. I mean, the neighborhood was a lot of retired people, and of course most of the families had children, so they didn't like, you know, the new neighborhood and how it was developing. But on the other hand, it is done voluntarily, rather than the government telling people you have to do this and you have to do that. Therefore, it was truly a learning experience. On the one hand, that there is always someone to help you. Someone, you know, you may not find that person at the beginning, but ultimately you do find people who are willing to help you. And, you know, on the other hand, we didn't need the government to do it. I mean, as long as people could, you know, rent out their apartments, you know, I think he did it because he could understand the situation we were in, but at the same time, he wanted to make money. You know, he wanted to rent out his apartment.
It's called a win-win situation.
It was a win-win situation for him, and I mean, I have always been very grateful for that.
One of the things that's significant about that, in my view, is that, and you'll hear people refer to those people, whoever those people happens to be. Well, if you go back 2-3 generations, we were those people. Yes. This is a nation built on being refugees, coming to this country, working hard and making it happen.
Right.
And very often people forget that experience. But back to the point about the Albanian community, and Sandy alluded to a certain degree of interest in it. No, he's not Albanian, but there is, as well you know, here in beautiful downtown Worcester, there is a very, very significant Albanian community. So it's interesting how those paths seem to have crossed in your life on more than one occasion.
Well, in a more interesting way, because you see, even though Holy Cross has students from everywhere, including the Worcester area, you know, several of the students from the Worcester area that I have met at Holy Cross were also Albanian. You know, and I would always tell them this story because, you know, I think they appreciated it very much.
The other thing, too, that comes across in the story, specifically in the kinds of words that your aunt used, she didn't try to play anything down. She was totally open and honest.
Right.
And she was rewarded for that.
She was rewarded for that. And that goes back to the fact that, you know, she had married a Jewish person in Cuba. And regrettably, like in many Latin American countries, there is discrimination against the Jewish population. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when she met this man who was a refugee from Europe, you know, people were so concerned, oh, what will your father say? What will your father do? Mm-hmm. You know, and she had the courage to say to her father, you know, I want to marry this man. And he said, well, what's the problem? And she said, well, you know, I want you to understand he's Jewish. And he said, well, is he an honest man? And she said, of course he's an honest man. And then he said, there is nothing else that matters. And I think that is the important point. In other words, you know, it's not just your background, but it is your honesty, your values. And I think that is something that people fail to recognize. In other words, they label people as the other. And I mean, this is an experience that Italians have gone through, that the Irish have gone through. I mean, it is a very widespread experience. But on the other hand, as you said, if people are willing to work, you know, they can find jobs, they can get ahead. I mean, my brother, my sister, and myself, we didn't have the money to, you know, to really go to graduate school, to school. My mother, incidentally, passed on very soon after we came to this country. Ouch. And, you know, yet the three of us borrowed money, you know, and the three of us were able to get PhDs in mathematics, in linguistics, and in economics, in my case.
All easy subjects.
All easy subjects.
Simple disciplines. Question, let's go back to 1960, I think it is.
Right.
You arrive in this country, stranger in a strange land. Did you speak English at that point?
Well, I had taken English classes in Cuba. Regrettably, it's not the same thing when you know, speak the language on an everyday basis and so on. It turned out, you know, this is kind of a funny thing. My younger cousin had gone to an American school in Havana. So my younger cousin was the one who spoke English fluently.
The mouth.
So he was the one doing all of the translation. And, you know, it was kind of a funny thing. But obviously, I came when I was 16 years old. So losing the accent, you know, after you're 16 and so on, it's very difficult.
Sure it is.
My cousin had studied English in Havana, and, you know, he also came at the age of 12. So, you know, he barely has an accent. But once you get older, you know, it's very difficult.
The speech patterns are pretty much established.
Yeah, established.
Did they have any ESL at that time?
Well, worse than that. Much worse than that. Because you see, since we were refugees, the whole idea was that we were going to go back to Cuba in just a few months. Therefore, you won't believe this, they set up a school in Miami where all the subjects were taught
in Spanish. Forget that, yeah.
I mean, that was so insane. Of course, once I moved on to Coral Gables Senior High, then I was forced, you know, to pick up the language. And to be quite honest with you, it was difficult. And it was difficult because at the same time, people didn't understand that, you know, there is a transition period. Can you believe that I took summer courses that in 61? They put me in a Shakespeare class. And I tell you, but you know what I did?
The last poor York.
I mean, can you imagine this? Because I had, you know, good grades, you know, I had my grades. I mean, the math classes were no problem because, you know, math, you figure it out very quickly. But they put me...
Excuse me, some people do.
Some people do, well. But anyway, they put me in this Shakespeare class. Now, what I did was I went to a bookstore that had the whole collection of Shakespeare in Spanish. So, you know, I said, that's it, because then I can go ahead and read, you know, what the class is reading in Spanish. Can you believe this? But at least I could understand, what the stories were about and so on. But it was a painful process. However, with my children, the school system said, oh, you should put your children in, to use Spanish and so on. And we said, no way, they'll pick it up. I mean, the kids here can pick it up with the help of TV very quickly. Yeah. And even though we spoke Spanish at home, because I'm married to another Cuban, we spoke Spanish at home, the children took 2 weeks to pick up, the English in school. And they have been very successful, no problem, no accent, nothing. But, I really do not like the idea of using another language in the schools. I mean, this is America. People come to America to be able to communicate with Americans. And the common language is English. I mean, as adults, I have older students, I have no problem, and both of my children did that, took classes in Spanish and so on and so forth. But I tell you, I think it is a very serious mistake. Number one, to think that you can be taught in Spanish and somehow, like by a miracle, learn to speak English. I mean, you have to be taught in English all the time, like an immersion program. So I serve in the Framingham School Committee, and I oppose the English as a second language. I do understand that there has to be a transition. But, the transition has to be done, for kids who just arrive and so on. But the transition has to be short. It has to be meaningful. You don't put a kid like they did with me in a Shakespeare class. I mean, I tell you, that was a nightmare, as you can imagine. Yeah. But it is the extremes that do not make sense, Yes, some kids do need help with the language, but you want the transition to be as rapidly as possible.
As opposed to it being a crutch.
A crutch that lasts for years and years and years. That's not a good idea.
Well, like it or not, in the U.S., and in many other parts of the world, English is the language of commerce.
Exactly.
So it's in everyone's best interest to have a reasonable level of mastery there, because if you don't, you're always playing catch up.
And not only that, you see, these kids, because they are small and so on, they really do not have a good understanding of Spanish. So they end up speaking Spanish improperly. And of course, a lot of other people don't realize that, but they are not learning the language properly. Because again, the way you learn a language is through immersion. And you can do that maybe at high school, you can do that definitely at the college level. But at the elementary school, I think it is a terrible mistake. I really think it's a terrible mistake.
How did you gravitate to economics? What was the catalyst behind that?
Well, what happened was I really wanted to understand what had happened in Cuba. And of course, in Cuba, you had economic problems. I mean, Cuba was a fairly well-developed country in the cities, but, fairly poor in the countryside. So, I mean, if you went to Havana, Havana was just like any other, literally like any other American city. But now you went into the countryside and it was a problem. So I wanted to understand why. And as a matter of fact, I wrote my PhD thesis on the sugar market because, of course, sugar was such an important commodity for Cuba. And so I was trying to understand my own history. Now, subsequently, I did not continue. I produced one academic article on the sugar market, but I move on to other things.
You've written a book?
Yes. People have a little bit of a misperception about the academy. They think books are important. it turns out that what is really important are the articles for, academic journals. So I have published quite a bit, but in, Harvard University has published my work, University of Chicago, University of Wisconsin, and so on, but technical articles. However, it turned out that about 2006, 2007, I was becoming very concerned with the American economy. And I mean, I taught a course in macroeconomics, and I taught a course in growth theory. And I mean, from those perspectives, I could understand that what we were doing, in those years was very serious, and, it would have very serious consequences. But the idea to me was, well, there are books that would explain, what was going on, but most of these books would be highly mathematical. Therefore, I said to myself, how, and quite a bit of my own work has been highly mathematical. So I said to myself, how do I communicate these ideas in such a way that the people out there could understand it? And you see, that's why I invited students to help me write the book, because I said, if the students write the book, then, that means that somebody who is educated can understand it. And that was the reason, that I chose two of my top students, and I wrote this book, but, to manage what was going on in the United States, to leave a message to, a broader audience.
And this book is, as we discussed in the previous conversation, this book is in how many libraries now?
Well, it is
academic
right now
libraries?
In about almost 1,000 libraries through the United States. The publisher is a publisher that specializes in, not books out there for the general audience, but for university libraries, town libraries, and so on. Last time I looked, it was about 950.
The title is?
And the title is Destined for Failure, American Prosperity in the Age of Bailouts. And it came out in 2010.
So it's very contemporary.
Yeah, it is.
Very current data and that sort of thing.
And regrettably, we're still in trouble. I mean, they have not done what needs to be done.
This has gone so quickly tonight, I can't believe it. What would you suggest our viewers do? What should they be reading? Should they pick up a copy of your book, or what would you
they
suggest
can find it at most libraries. So, they could order it at Amazon.
It's on Amazon as well.
Yeah, right.
That's great. Folks, I wish this was an hour or more show, but unfortunately it's not. The clock on the wall says skedaddle, so we have to do it. I want to thank Nick for having just an amazing guest, and we look forward to having you on again.
Listen, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.